Welcome. I'm Barbara Stone, Dean of the College. Welcome to Shimer community members and friends of the college and those of you perhaps who have never been here. This is quite an event we have this evening, reading passages from books that have been banned in the United States, some of them are in our curriculum, and then of course people have chosen lots and lots of others. Stuart's going to give an introduction, talk a fair amount about banned books, and he's taken the responsibility and the initiative for this event. But of course, I think we've all had this whole question of banned books on our minds ever since we decided to do One Book, One Chicago this time around. And the thought I've had is not only what books have been banned, but I've been thinking a lot more, okay, yes, we now have an evening where we have the freedom to read texts which have been banned. But I think there's also another piece of it that's really important, is we can do this. We can read texts, but we also need to think about the purpose and why we are reading them and context in which we read texts. Do we read them as we do at Shimer, to discuss them, to talk about them, to listen to each other's interpretations, get a better understanding of the text? I would say the last couple of weeks we've had a experience here across the globe of a video that has been made, that has spread. Obviously it was throughout the Muslim community, throughout the Middle East, and we have had, what have we had? Fires, flames, and killings. Now, that really makes us think, okay, in that case, tonight a book. We can discuss books, we can incite riots, we can contemplate, we can read them on our own. So in just a general way, yes, we have this freedom to read tonight. What we also want to think about is what we want to do with that freedom. Having said that, Stuart.
Sort of think about what we want to do with what we've heard. So that said, let me just tell you what I've been thinking about over the last couple of days. And I'll begin with the fact that I brought a book that is currently banned in many areas of the world, and that is Mein Kampf. And I should immediately allow that this might seem a willfully perverse choice, a gesture at the start of an event like this. And I'll say more on that in a minute. But I bring it in part because it's apropos of the choice of the One Book, One Chicago book this fall, which is called The Book Thief. And in addition to celebrating the American Library Association's Banned Books Week, we're celebrating the beginning of a month of readings and discussions of The Book Thief, which is the book chosen this fall by the mayor's office for all of Chicago to read and to come together individually and in groups and talk about it. The Book Thief, and by the way, just another quick note, on the 9th, next Tuesday at 6:30, and then on the 23rd, which is 2 weeks following Tuesday, we'll be having book discussions about The Book Thief, and you can get copies of that at the library. The Book Thief, which is by Marcus Zusak, is narrated by the figure of Death, who tells the story of a young girl who grows up in the 1930s in Germany and befriends an older woman who goes to ritual book burnings in Germany and steals books from them and brings them home and stores them in her house so that they can be read, which is, needless to say, a very dangerous and courageous act. And I think that it's an interesting choice, The Book Thief, as a collective exercise in reading, because it poses such a stark contrast to what the book is about. And we're challenged by The Book Thief to enter a world in which books are ritually destroyed. Destroyed, in fact, under the aegis of this book. And I think that some of the readings that we'll hear tonight will remind us that, in fact, the Nazis weren't the inventors of the book burning. It's been going on for millennia, and as Barbara mentioned, we're still faced with conditions in the world today in which people are burning books. So it's a timely thing. And if anyone groaned inwardly when I held up Mein Kampf as a book I brought, that I was going to be reading from it, rest assured I'm not. But I'm going to do something that I feel is even riskier. And that is to propose for you to imagine that I hold it up and I propose that we burn it. And I do so asking you to reflect on the horror of just that proposal. And I'm confident, or I'm fairly confident, that as soon as you hear me suggest that, even of this book, that you recoil. And I want to ask why. Because if I'm right, I want to understand where our revulsion to book burning is coming from. And I think that for me it's a basic clash between fundamental aspects of ourselves that contrast the acts of intentional burning on one hand, and on the other, reading. A book is something made by a human being, something into which an author has put months or years of careful thought, along with the trust that it would be opened and read, not consigned to flames. John Milton, in the Areopagitica, his banned and burned pamphlet, decrying censorship following the English Civil War in 1644, put it even more eloquently. Books, he wrote, quote, contain a potency of life in them to be as active as that soul was whose progeny they are. Anyone who kills a man, Milton wrote, kills a reasonable creature, God's image. But he who destroys a book kills reason itself. And this is why burning a book, or even simply consigning it to a shelf out of anyone's reach, seemed to me among the most potent demonstrations of how toxic a mixture of aggression and fear can be. The early 19th century German poet Heinrich Heine, whose own works were burnt by the Nazis, famously put it that where they burn books, they will wind up burning people. And it seems right to me to extend the grim logic of this statement and suggest that a people who ban books, or let them be banned without such protests as we're staging here, may in the end be tempted to begin burning them. So in neither burning nor banning Mein Kampf itself, we confront the aggression and fear such acts represent with the power to read. A mix instead of deliberate critical reflection and the very intimate act, not of destruction or dismissal, but engagement. So let me turn back briefly to the idea behind One Book, One Chicago, and that is of selecting a book for an entire city to read and come together to discuss. That idea should be familiar to anyone at Shimer, or who knows us, because that's what we do all year, read and discuss selected books. But put this way, I think we encounter another really crucial aspect of the Banned Books Week celebration. For it's often an uncomfortable reflection for many of us here at Shimer that leaving a book off a reading list can feel like an injustice. Not an outright banning, but neglect at least, and neglect often where we feel it's not deserved. So, though I am asking that no one read beyond about a page's worth of the text they've brought, tonight no choice is enforced. And what I want to finish by pointing out is that if we're celebrating anything tonight, it is to begin with the freedom to choose what we read. And at the same time, we're also celebrating our own fortitude in giving others the freedom to choose what they read, even while we consider ourselves free and even responsible enough to engage them about the choices they've made. So, with that, I am going to start calling on people a little bit at random. And if you don't mind, just come up with your book and read from it, announce a little bit about what the history of the book is, Yes, Eugene? Okay. No. It can have been banned anywhere at any time, under whatever circumstances. So that means, basically anything interesting that's been written. So how would you like to start, Eugene? How would you like to start? Do you want to go first? Great.
I asked that question because it's pertinent to the book that I'm about to read, because it wasn't banned in the US. It was banned in Canada, according to the Newsletter of Civil Liberties, which has a list that's accurate for some reason up to only the 30th of June, 1997. This book was on the Seize and Destroy list of Canada Customs, and it wasn't banned in the US, although I want to just read a short excerpt from an interview that the author Guy Davenport, and the book is called Tot Lean, gave in 2002. He said, "When Tot Lean was accepted for publication, I remember being anxious and frightened, truly frightened that reviewers would say this is pretentious. What they said was this is obscene, which is surprising, I think. But the passage that I'm about to read from it might demonstrate the fear. And I guess it's really up to you to decide whether or not it's founded. But, all right, so. It was the year after the war, when he was 17, and Rotterdam still stood in ruins, grown up in wildflowers, and peace incredible and strange was a thing to breathe. On the fragrant pine knot fire, the water for their coffee beaded towards boiling. Piet unsheathed the glands of his cock from his foreskin, ein Minute so. They swam in the icy Baltic, shivered through breakfast, resorting again to clothes, until the sun was high. They climbed trees to see the horizon lose itself in glare in every direction. They wrestled, brown as skrylings, and swam again. They had assumed the wild, sweet freedom of jerking off in their inviolable privacy. Their appetence became resilient with repetition. The Baltic sun turned them amber as they lay on the high rocks naked, their delicious hands sliding the slick foreskins of their distended cocks voluptuously up and down, skillfully. They came, eyes squinting with the sweetness of it, biting their underlip, fell asleep in the sun, woke, and lasciviously began again. They swam, held each other's ankles for sit-ups, ate when they pleased, climbed trees as if their island were a ship with sails to trim, and sat on a blanket by their evening fire in the long red light of the slow northern sun. They jerked off side by side in their narrow tent before sleep. He had been at first hot-cheeked and shy when Piet, in a glory of nonchalance, the tip of his tongue flicking between his chipmunk teeth, lay on the mid-island's floor of pine needles, long legs spread, his haversack under his shoulders, bringing his cock with slow strokes to a tall erection. Adrian sat against a tree, reticent, dry-mouthed, aching to feel at ease. Niet so vlug, Piet grinned in his clear way, his cock standing in a slow curve, a bend as shallow as a ribs, gripped in the ride of his brown fist. His own satyr's abandon had grown easily once he had begun. He was surprised that Eros had such charm, who had been before so furtive and nocturnal. Piet he had met at the gymnasium. Was it Plato and the Greek statues, or the Danish magazines of physical culture with their athletes oiled and naked, that began his fierce shaping of his body into a trim wedge? He went in the afternoons to a new, elegantly designed gym, all chrome and mirrors, a fairly long streetcar ride from his school. He began with sit-ups, his ankles under a strap, toughening his abdomen into a quilt of hard flesh. Then the weights on bars, curls to broaden his forearms, squats and stands to stouten his calves and thighs, presses to raise his chest to a high relief of Plato's disciples, of Viking earls, or the marble gods. Piet taught him to throw the javelin. He bought a beautiful blue one, ruffling the dignity of the streetcar where he brought it home. He relished the neat clarity of the strenuous life, the erotic economy of jockstraps and short cotton pants, of indigo maillots with thin bretelles edged with a white line. He bought American tennis shoes, a 12-speed Peugeot yellow and silver, minimal French briefs, Brynja undershirts from Norway, a poplin summer jacket with zippered pockets. They spent whole Saturdays biking, their lungs like bellows, heads low over dropped handlebars. He became Narcissus before the mirror. He began to read Spinoza. Through Nietzsche, he discovered the phosokratika. He began Greek. Harpazda was his first word. I seize. I am alive, he wrote in his notebook that he'd just begun to keep, after the last of the wars. Europe rises new and clean from the rubble of the Schrecklichkeit. We begin again.
All right. I am reading from Manuel Puig's Kiss of the Spiderwoman, which was actually banned in his home country before it was even published. He was from Argentina, and it was first published in Spain. It wasn't until almost a decade later that they actually published it in his country. It was banned throughout various countries in Latin America for a while after its publication in 1978. I have a specific attachment to it, though, because I read it in high school, and it was actually challenged and for a time not allowed in the curriculum at my high school shortly after we read it. The passage that I am going to read from is not really one of the inflammatory ones, mostly because I wanted to choose something that gives a little bit more of a sense of what it is as a novel rather than just something that's considered controversial. And also partly because it's told entirely through dialogue, and I wanted to choose a passage that was long enough for me to not have to do different voices. Okay, so here it is. A European woman, a bright woman, a beautiful woman, an educated woman, a woman with a knowledge of international politics, a woman with a knowledge of Marxism, a woman with whom it isn't necessary to explain it all from A to Z, a woman who knows how to stimulate a man's thinking with an intelligent question, a woman of unbribable integrity, a woman of impeccable taste, a woman of discreet but elegant dress, a woman who's young and at the same time mature, a woman who knows a good drink, a woman who knows how to order a meal, a woman who knows the right wine, a woman who knows how to entertain at home, a woman who knows how to give orders to her servants, a woman who knows how to organize a reception for 100 people, a woman of poise and charm, a desirable woman, a woman who understands the problems of a Latin American, a European woman who admires a Latin American revolutionary, a woman more preoccupied, nonetheless, with Paris automobile traffic than with the problems of some colonized Latin American country, an attractive woman, a woman who won't be shaken by the news of someone's demise, a woman who is capable of hiding a telegram for hours with the news of the death of her lover's father, a woman who refuses to quit her job in Paris, a woman who refuses to accompany her lover on a trip back to the jungle coffee region, a woman who goes right back to the daily routine of busy Parisian executive, a woman who nonetheless finds it difficult to forget true love, a woman who knows what she wants, a woman who has no regrets about her final decision, a dangerous woman, a woman who is capable of quickly forgetting, a woman with the power to forget what would have only become a burden, a woman who could even forget the death of a fellow who returns to his own country, a fellow who's flying back to his own country, a fellow who from up in the sky observes the azure mountains of his country, a fellow moved to tears, a fellow who knows what he wants, a fellow who hates the colonists in his country, a fellow ready to sacrifice his life in defense of principles, a fellow who cannot comprehend the exploitation of the workers, a fellow who's seen old peons tossed out into the street because they're no longer useful, a fellow who remembers peons imprisoned for robbing the bread they couldn't afford, and later turned to drink to forget their own humiliation, a fellow with an unshakable faith in the precepts of Marxism, a fellow with his mind made up to enter in contact with guerrilla organizations, a fellow who from up in the sky observes the mountains, certain of his forthcoming meeting with the liberators of his country, a fellow who's afraid of being taken for an oligarch, a fellow who, ironically enough, could be kidnapped by the guerrillas in hopes of a ransom, a fellow who gets off the plane and embraces his widowed mother, dressed there in strident colors, a mother without tears in her eyes, a mother respected by an entire nation, a mother of impeccable taste. This actually goes on for several more pages because it keeps switching perspectives, all in that same sentence. But I'll cut it off there.
Thank you. Okay, next, we're going to hear from Adam Ornstein.
I have notes, so forgive me. But Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials trilogy is a masterfully written epic of a young adult series. The books are an inverted retelling of Milton's Paradise Lost, and they contain a veritable laundry list of controversial material, which makes it no surprise that the series holds the number 2 spot on the American Library Association's list of challenged books. The story contains elements such as witchcraft, tyrannical church imposing its dogma on all people, forced castrations of children, a pair of male intimately romantic angels, a populist war against the kingdom of heaven, and the very literal death of God. Again, children's series, or young adult. Not only, though, has the series been banned from numerous schools and libraries, I was troubled to learn while I was researching the controversy about the series that the censorship extends to the books themselves. The North American editions, even if your library hasn't banned this book that I'm going to read, The Amber Spyglass, they would carry North American editions which have been censored by the publisher, edited from the British manuscript to remove passages containing very tame sexual imagery. I'd like to read 2 unrelated passages. One's in here, and one I have to use Wikipedia for, since it's nowhere to be found in my copy. This is from a chapter titled Authority's End. "Will," said Lyra behind him, "Will, look at this." She was gazing into the crystal litter. It was unbroken, although the crystal was stained and smeared with mud and blood from what the cliff ghasts had been eating before they found it. It lay tilted crazily among the rocks, and inside it, "Oh, Will, he's still alive, but the poor thing." Will saw her hands pressing against the crystal, trying to reach in to the angel and comfort him, because he was so old, and he was terrified, crying like a baby and cowering away into the lowest corner. "He must be so old. I've never seen anyone suffering like that. Oh, Will, can't we let him out?" Will cut through the crystal in one movement and reached in to help the angel out. Demented and powerless, the aged being could only weep and mumble in fear and pain and misery, and he shrank away from what seemed like yet another threat. "It's all right," Will said. "We'll help you hide, at least. Come on, we won't hurt you." The shaking hand seized his and feebly held on. The old one was uttering a wordless, groaning whimper that went on, and grinding his teeth and compulsively plucking at himself with his free hand. But as Lyra reached in, too, to help him out, he tried to smile and to bow, and his ancient eyes, deep in their wrinkles, blinked at her with innocent wonder. Between them, they helped the Ancient of Days out of his crystal cell. It wasn't hard, for he was as light as paper, and he would have followed them anywhere, having no will of his own, and responding to simple kindness like a flower to the sun. But in the open air there was nothing to stop the wind from damaging him, and to their dismay his form began to loosen and dissolve. Only a few moments later he had vanished completely, and their last impression was of those eyes, blinking in wonder, and a sigh of the most profound and exhausted relief. Then he was gone, a mystery dissolving in mystery. It had all taken less than a minute, and Will turned back at once to the fallen Chevalier. And this is from a chapter towards the end of the book, and this is what was censored, one of the passages that was censored in the North American edition. As Mary said that, Lyra felt something strange happening to her body. She found a stirring at the roots of her hair. She found herself breathing faster. She had never been on a roller coaster or anything like one, but if she had, she would have recognized the sensations in her breast. They were exciting and frightening at the same time, and she had not the slightest idea why. The sensation continued and deepened and changed as more parts of her body found themselves affected too. She felt as if she had been handed the key to a great house she hadn't known there was there, a house that was somehow inside her, and as she turned the key, deep in the darkness of the building, she felt other doors opening too, and lights coming on. She sat trembling, hugging her knees, hardly daring to breathe, as Mary went on. That's all.
Is Adrian Adrian, come on up.
Ulysses by James Joyce is famously obscure and famously obscene. It was first published in 1922, and it ostensibly follows the story of one man, Leopold Bloom, on one day through Dublin, and its episodes can be separated into chapters which in some ways parallel the events of the Odyssey, hence the name Ulysses. It was the subject of numerous obscenity trials and wasn't unbanned from the United States until 1933. So I highly recommend going through it, if you can, to figure out what the obscenities were. This last part that I'm going to be reading here is the last chapter in the book, which is the only one that's narrated by Bloom's wife, Molly. And it's famously only 8 sentences long, but it would take too long to read the last sentence, so I'm just going to read the last page. And as I read this, feel free to imagine me lying on my side, as that's the position that Molly's in when she's saying this. As for them saying there's no God, I wouldn't give a snap of my 2 fingers for all their learning. Why don't they go and create something? I often asked him, atheists or whatever they call themselves, go and wash the cobbles off themselves first. Then they go howling for the priest and they dying. And why? Why? Because they're afraid of hell on account of their bad conscience. Ah, yes, I know them well. Who was the first person in the universe before there was anybody that made it all? Who? Ah, they don't know that. Neither do I. So there you are. They might as well try to stop the sun from rising tomorrow. The sun shines for you, he said. The day we were lying among the rhododendrons on Howth Head in the gray tweed suit and his straw hat. The day I got him to propose to me, yes. First, I gave him the bit of seed cake out of my mouth, and it was leap year like now. Yes, 16 years ago, my God. After that long kiss, I near lost my breath. Yes, he said. I was a flower of the mountain. Yes, so we are all flowers, all a woman's body. Yes. That was the one true thing he said in his life, and the sun shines for you today. Yes, that was why I liked him, because I knew, I saw, he understood or felt what a woman is, and I knew I could always get round him, and I gave him all the pleasure I could, leading him on till he asked me to say yes. And I wouldn't answer first, only looked out over the sea and the sky. I was thinking of so many things he didn't know. Mulvey and Mr. Stanhope and Hester and Father and old Captain Groves and the sailors playing All Birds Fly, and I say stoop and washing up dishes, they called it on the pier, and the sentry in front of the governor's house with the thing round his white helmet. Poor devil, half-roasted, and the Spanish girls laughing in their shawls and their tall combs, and the auctions in the morning, the Greeks and the Jews and the Arabs, and the devil knows who else from all ends of Europe, and Duke Street, and the foul market all clucking outside Larbusharans, and the poor donkeys slipping half asleep, and the vague fellows in the cloaks asleep in the shade of the steps, and the big wheels of the carts of the bulls, and the old castle thousands of years old, yes, and those handsome Moors all in white turbans like kings, asking you to sit down in their little bit of a shop in Ronda, with the old windows of the posadas, glancing eyes, a lattice hid for her lover to kiss the iron, and the wine shops half open at night, and the castanets, and the night we missed the boat at Alsecuras, the watchman going about serene with his lamp, and oh, that awful deep-down torrent, oh, and the sea, crimson sometimes like fire, and the glorious sunsets, and the fig trees, and the Alameda gardens, yes, and all the queer little streets, and pink and blue and yellow houses, and the rose gardens, the jessamine, and geraniums, and cactuses, and Gibraltar, the girl when I was a flower of the mountain, yes, when I shall put the rose in my hair like the Andalusian girls used to, or shall I wear a red, yes, and how he kissed me under the Moorish wall, and I thought, well as well, him is another, and then I asked him with my eyes to ask again, yes, and then he asked me would I say yes, to say yes, my mountain flower. First I put my arms around him, yes, and drew him down to me, so he could feel my breasts all perfume, yes. His heart was going like mad, and yes, I said, yes, I will, yes.